The silence in this house is a living thing. It breathes in the dusty air of the hallways and settles over the furniture like a shroud. It's been 3 years since Eleanor left, but the silence that followed her departure has only grown louder, more profound. It's a constant companion, a hollow echo where her laughter used to be. I often find myself speaking to her, my voice a low murmur in the stillness, narrating the small, insignificant events of my day. I'll be in the kitchen, making my solitary cup of tea, and I'll say, "The roses are coming in beautifully this year, my love." You'd be so pleased, and for a fleeting moment, I can almost feel her presence, a warm pressure in the air, a scent of lavender and old books. But it's just a trick of a lonely mind. The house is big, far too big for one man whose world has shrunk to the size of a few familiar rooms. Each closed door is a chapter of our life together that I can't quite bring myself to reopen. The study, with her half-finished crossword puzzle still on the desk. The sewing room, a cascade of colorful fabrics frozen in time. These rooms are shrines, and I am their lonely keeper. My life now is a routine, a carefully constructed scaffolding to get me from sunrise to sunset. I read the paper, I tend to Eleanor's garden, I watch the world go by from the armchair by the window. The highlight, the one crack of light in the monotony, is the prospect of seeing family. Or at least, it's supposed to be. Tonight was meant to be special. A family dinner at La Belle Époque, the little French bistro where Eleanor and I celebrated our 40th anniversary. It was my idea, of course. It's always my idea. And my treat. Always my treat. I'd booked the reservation weeks ago, picturing us all around the table, my daughter, Clara, her husband, Tom, and the grandchildren, Mark and Lily. I imagined the warm glow of the candlelight, the murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses. A small pocket of warmth and connection in my otherwise cold and quiet existence. I've come to understand that this is the currency of my relationship with them now. My presence is tolerated, even welcomed, as long as it comes with a paid dinner tab or a check for some unforeseen emergency. I try not to let the bitterness take root. Eleanor always said to find the good in people, especially family. But sometimes, it's hard to see past the thinly veiled impatience in Clara's voice, the way Tom's eyes glaze over when I talk about the past, the way they both check their watches when a visit stretches past the hour mark. They live in a different world, a faster, more transactional world than the one I built with Eleanor. A world where time is money and affection is an investment that needs to show a return. The phone sits on the hall table, a black relic from another era. It rings so rarely that the sound is always a jolt to my system. When it shrilled to life this afternoon, my heart gave a little leap of anticipation. Perhaps it was Clara, confirming the time. Perhaps Lily, my youngest grandchild, wanted to tell me how excited she was. I picked up the receiver, my hand slightly unsteady. "Dad." It was Clara. Her voice was strained, wrapped in a layer of artificial sympathy that she reserves for delivering bad news or asking for money. "Hi, sweetheart. Everything all right for tonight?" I asked, trying to keep my own voice light. There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background, the tinny laughter of a sitcom audience. "About that, Dad. I'm so sorry." The words were drawn out, each syllable dripping with manufactured regret. "We're going to have to cancel." My stomach tightened. "Oh? Is everything okay?" "It's Lily," she said, and the lie was so swift, so practiced, it almost sounded real. "She's come down with a terrible fever. We've been up all night with her. She's just miserable, poor thing. There's no way we can drag her out to a restaurant." I pictured Lily, my bright, bubbly 7-year-old granddaughter. The last time I spoke to her, just yesterday, she was a whirlwind of energy, chattering about a school project and how she couldn't wait to have the chocolate lava cake at the fancy French place. "Oh, the poor dear," I said, the requisite words of concern feeling like ash in my mouth. "Is there anything I can do? Should I come over?" No. The response was too quick, too sharp. "Honestly, Dad, you shouldn't. We don't want you catching whatever this is. It's best you just stay put. We'll reschedule. Soon." I promise. The promise hung in the air, flimsy and transparent. We both knew it was an empty gesture. Sooner was their favorite word, a convenient placeholder for a never. Well, I said, my voice sounding smaller than I wanted it to. You give her a kiss from her granddad. I hope she feels better. Will do, Dad. So sorry again. I'll call you tomorrow to check in. Love you. Bye. And just like that, the line went dead. I stood there for a long time, the receiver still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone's lonely hum. The silence of the house rushed back in, heavier than before. It wasn't just the cancellation. It was the ease of the lie. The complete lack of respect it implied. They didn't even bother to craft a believable excuse. They assumed I would simply accept it, the meek and lonely old man, and fade back into the wallpaper of their lives until the next time they needed something. I looked at the suit I had laid out on my bed, freshly pressed. I saw the polished shoes by the door. I felt the familiar pang of disappointment, a dull ache I had grown far too accustomed to. But this time, something else was there too. A flicker of something sharp and unfamiliar. It felt like anger, but colder. Calmer. A quiet rebellion stirring in the deep, silent parts of my soul. I looked out the window at the setting sun, painting the sky in melancholy shades of orange and purple. The evening stretched before me, a vast, empty expanse. And in that moment, I decided I would not spend it alone in this house, nursing a phantom disappointment. The reservation was still there, in my name. The table was waiting. And I would go. Not for them. For me. For Eleanor. I would go and sit in our special place and raise a glass to her, to us. And if my heart broke a little more in the process, then so be it. It was better than letting it slowly turn to stone in the suffocating silence of this house. My hand was on the doorknob when the doubt began to creep in. What was I doing? Driving across town to sit alone in a fancy restaurant on a Thursday night seemed like the very definition of pathetic. It was one thing to be lonely, it was another to advertise it. The image of the sympathetic hostess leading me to a small table for one, the pitying glances from other diners, it was enough to make me retreat to the safety of my armchair. Clara's voice echoed in my head, dripping with that false concern. Honestly, Dad, you shouldn't. It's best you just stay put. They had a box for me, a neat little container labeled frail, elderly father. I was supposed to stay inside it, be predictable, be manageable. Don't cause a fuss. Don't have needs of your own. Just be there when we need you and be invisible when we don't. The thought, so stark and clear, was what propelled me out the door. It wasn't about the dinner anymore. It was about refusing to fit into their box. I started the car, the engine rumbling to life in the quiet garage. The drive to La Belle Epoque was a journey through memory lane. Every corner, every traffic light seemed to hold a ghost of a memory with Eleanor. There was the park where we'd walk after Sunday lunch, her arm linked through mine. There was the little cinema, now boarded up, where we had our first date. I remembered her laugh, a sound like wind chimes, as I fumbled with the tickets. The pain of her absence was a physical presence beside me in the passenger seat, a weight that made my chest feel tight. Was I chasing ghosts? Perhaps. But maybe that was better than sitting at home, waiting for a phone call that would only come when a bill was due. The suspicion about Clara's lie was more than just a gut feeling. It was a pattern, a long and sordid history of casual deceptions. There was the time they'd forgotten her to invite me to Mark's graduation, only for me to see the photos on social media later, a big, boisterous family party. Their excuse? Oh, Dad, it was all so last minute. We didn't want to bother you for the time they borrowed £5,000 for a leaky roof, and a week later Clara posted pictures of their new luxury hot tub. When I gently inquired, Tom had mumbled something about a fantastic insurance payout that had conveniently come through. They thought me naive. They mistook my quietness for ignorance, my generosity for foolishness. For years, I had chosen to believe their flimsy stories because the alternative was too painful to confront. Acknowledging the depth of their selfishness felt like admitting a personal failure. Had I raised a daughter who saw me not as a father, but as a resource? The thought was a bitter pill. Then there was the phone call with Lily yesterday. I replayed it in my mind. I'd called to see how she was, and she'd been bubbling with excitement. "Grandad, are you excited for tomorrow? Mommy said we're going to the fancy French place and I can wear my sparkly dress and have 2 desserts. A fever? A child that excited doesn't just develop a debilitating fever overnight. It was possible, of course. Children get sick. But the conviction in Lily's voice, contrasted with the hollow performance from Clara, the pieces didn't fit. As I pulled into the valet parking at La Belle Epoque, a sense of calm washed over me. I wasn't here to cause a scene. I wasn't here for a confrontation. I was simply an observer, a man seeking a moment of peace in a place that held sacred memories. I straightened my tie, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The restaurant was just as I remembered. Dimly lit, intimate, with the soft strains of an accordion playing in the background. The air smelled of garlic, batter, and wine. It was the scent of 1,000 happy memories. The hostess, a young woman with a kind smile, approached me. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" "I do," I said, my voice steady. "It's under the name Arthur Penhaligon. A table for 4, I believe, for 7:30." She tapped on her tablet, her brow furrowing slightly. "Ah, yes. Mr. Penhaligon. Your party has already been seated." Oh, my heart stopped. For a single, dizzying second, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. My party? "Yes, sir. A lady checked in about 20 minutes ago. She said you were just parking the car." The hostess smiled, oblivious to the earthquake she had just triggered within me. "They're in the main dining room, just over there. A lovely booth by the window." She gestured vaguely towards the back of the restaurant. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just a lie. It was a premeditated, calculated theft. They hadn't just cancelled on me, they had usurped my reservation, my name, my money, to have the very celebration they had explicitly excluded me from. The blood drained from my face. I felt a chill spread through my limbs, a coldness that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The hostess's smile faltered. "Sir? Are you all right? You look a bit pale." I managed a nod, my throat too tight to form words. Perhaps I'll just have a drink at the bar first," I finally managed to croak out, my voice raspy. "Of course, sir. Right this way." She led me to the small, polished bar at the front of the restaurant. It was slightly elevated, offering a discreet, panoramic view of the entire dining room. I sank onto a stool, my legs feeling weak. The bartender approached, but I waved him away. I didn't want a drink. I just needed a moment to let the reality of the betrayal sink in. My eye scanned the room, moving past laughing couples and families until they found them. The booth by the window. And there they were. Clara. Tom. And their son, Mark. Not a hint of sickness or worry among them. Clara was laughing, her head thrown back, a glass of champagne in her hand. Tom was gesturing expansively, telling a story, a smug look on his face. Mark, my 17-year-old grandson, was hunched over his phone, but even he looked up to smirk at whatever his father was saying. There was no sign of Lily. Of course not. She was likely at home with a babysitter, her fever's a convenient fiction. They were feasting. The table was laden with appetizers, escargots, a charcuterie board, oysters. A bottle of what looked like very expensive wine was chilling in a silver bucket beside them. My wine. Paid for by the credit card I had put on file to secure the reservation. The card they knew was there. The one they were counting on to cover their secret celebration. The initial shock began to subside, replaced by a profound, heart-wrenching sadness. It was the sheer audacity of it. The cruelty. To not only lie to me but to sit in this very restaurant, a place so filled with my history, my love for Eleanor, and to use it as the stage for their deceit. It felt like a desecration. I watched them, a ghost at their feast, and the sadness began to curdle, to harden into something else. It was a cold, clear, and unshakable resolve. They had underestimated me for the last time. They saw a frail old man, a walking bank account, a relic to be managed. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. I sat at the bar for what felt like an eternity, an invisible spectator to my own humiliation. Every peal of laughter from their table was a small, sharp jab to my heart. I watched them order another bottle of wine, saw Tom pontificate to the sommelier with the air of a man who appreciates the finer things, especially when someone else is paying for them. I saw Clara preen, touching her hair, basking in the glow of the expensive restaurant, a world away from the daughter who had feigned distress over her child just hours earlier. The initial wave of pain had receded, leaving behind a strange and unnerving clarity. It was as if a fog had lifted, a fog of hope and denial that I had allowed to cloud my judgment for years. I was seeing them, truly seeing them, for the first time. Not as the family I wished they were, but as the people they had chosen to become, callous, greedy, and profoundly disrespectful. I thought of Eleanor. What would she have done? Eleanor was a force of nature wrapped in a gentle demeanor. She possessed a backbone of steel and a fierce sense of justice. She never suffered fools, and she certainly wouldn't have tolerated this. I could almost hear her voice in my ear, crisp and clear, "Arthur, you are not a doormat. Do not let them wipe their feet on you," and in that moment, I knew I couldn't just slink away. I couldn't go home to my silent house and let this fester inside me. That would be a betrayal of her memory, and a betrayal of myself. But a direct confrontation right now felt wrong. It would be messy, emotional. It would give them the satisfaction of seeing my pain, of casting me as the hysterical old man making a scene. No. My response had to be like me, quiet, deliberate, and devastatingly effective. I watched them for a few more minutes, committing the scene to memory. The way Tom raised his glass in a toast, his eyes gleaming with smug satisfaction. The way Clara nodded, a self-satisfied smile playing on her lips. They were toasting their own cleverness, celebrating their successful deception. They had no idea they were being watched. They were safe in their bubble of arrogance. I slipped off the bar stool, my movement slow and measured. I walked to the hostess stand, keeping my back to the main dining room. The kind young woman looked up at me, a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Is everything all right, sir?" "Everything is perfectly fine," I said, and to my own surprise, my voice was completely steady. "I've just remembered a prior engagement I'd completely forgotten about. It's terribly embarrassing. I'm afraid I won't be able to join my party for dinner after all." I pulled out my wallet. "I'd like to settle the bill for their table now, if I may. All of it. And please, add a generous tip for the staff. They shouldn't be penalized for my mistake." The hostess looked confused. "But sir, they've only just started." "They've ordered quite a lot, that's quite all right," I interrupted gently. "Consider it my gift to them. Just do me one small favor. Please don't inform them that the bill has been paid until after they've finished their meal and asked for the check. I don't want to disturb their evening." It was a small act, the first step in a much larger plan that was beginning to form in my mind. A plan that felt both terrifying and deeply, righteously satisfying. She processed my request, her professional training overriding her confusion. "Of course, Mr. Penhaligon. As you wish." I handed her my credit card. The same one they were counting on. As she ran the transaction, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a scene from a film. This wasn't about the money. The cost of the meal was insignificant in the grand scheme of things. This was about control. I was taking back the narrative. I would be the one to write the ending to this particular story. Once the transaction was complete, I gave her a polite nod. "Thank you for your discretion." I turned and walked out of the restaurant, without a single backward glance. The cool night air hit my face, a welcome shock after the stuffy warmth inside. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't even feel sad. I felt cold. A deep, glacial calm had settled over me. The drive home was a blur. The memories of Eleanor were still there, but they were no longer painful ghosts. They were a source of strength. I was defending our legacy, the life of dignity and respect we had built together. A life my own daughter was trying to dismantle, one casual lie at a time. When I walked back into my house, the silence felt different. It was no longer the oppressive, lonely silence of before. It was the quiet of a war room. A place of strategy and preparation. I walked straight past the living room, past my armchair, and into the one room I had been avoiding for 3 years, the study. Eleanor's study. It was just as she'd left it. Her reading glasses lay on an open book. A stack of letters she'd meant to answer sat in a neat pile. And on the mahogany desk, next to the half-finished crossword, was her old leather-bound address book. I ran my fingers over the worn cover, the scent of old paper and her faint perfume rising to meet me. My hands were shaking now, not from weakness, but from adrenaline. I flipped through the pages, past relatives and old neighbors, until I found the name I was looking for. George Albright. Albright and Finch Legal's George. My oldest friend. We had started our first businesses at the same time, 2 young men full of ambition and dreams. We'd been best men at each other's weddings. We'd celebrated triumphs and weathered storms together. But we'd drifted apart in recent years, lost in the currents of retirement and grandchildren and changing lives. I hadn't spoken to him since Eleanor's funeral. He was more than a friend, he was one of the sharpest legal minds in the city. He was exactly who I needed. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 9 o'clock. Too late to call, probably. But I didn't care. I picked up the phone, my heart pounding a steady, determined rhythm against my ribs, and dialed the number. The plan was no longer a vague notion. It was taking shape, solid and real. And it would begin with this phone call. My family thought they were having a secret feast at my expense. They had no idea that the real bill was yet to come. The phone rang 4 times, each ring echoing in the cavernous quiet of the study. I was about to hang up, convinced I had missed my chance, when a familiar voice, slightly gravelly with age but still sharp as a tack, answered. George Albright speaking. A wave of relief washed over me. George? It's Arthur. Arthur Penhaligon. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and I worried that he wouldn't remember me, that too much time had passed. But then he spoke, his voice warming with recognition. Arthur! My goodness, man, it's been too long. How are you? I was so sorry about Eleanor. I should have called. It's all right, George, I said, cutting off the apology I knew he would feel obligated to make. Life happens. I'm calling because, well, I find myself in a bit of a situation. I need some advice. Legal advice, I think at 9 o'clock on a Thursday, he chuckled. Must be serious. Or you finally decided to sue that neighbor of yours with the yapping dog. I managed a small smile. His humor was just as I remembered it. Worse than that, George. It's family he said, and the humor in his voice vanished, replaced by a tone of sober understanding. Say no more. Or rather, say it all. I'm listening, and so I did. I told him everything. I started with tonight, the lie about Lily, the usurped reservation, the sight of them feasting in our special place. I painted the picture for him, my voice low and steady, devoid of the shaking emotion I felt inside. I then worked my way backwards, recounting the years of casual neglect, the constant financial requests, the growing sense of being treated not as a person, but as a convenience. I spoke of my loneliness, of the cavernous house, of the feeling that I was simply waiting out my days until they could inherit what Eleanor and I had spent a lifetime building. I laid it all bare, the raw, unvarnished truth of my life. It was a confession, a purging of years of quiet disappointment. When I finally finished, the silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. I feared I had burdened him, an old friend, with my pathetic family drama. But when he spoke, his voice was filled not with pity, but with a cold, simmering anger on my behalf. The ungrateful, conniving little parasites, he said, with a vitriol that startled me. Arthur, I am so sorry. No man deserves to be treated that way by his own flesh and blood. Especially not you. The validation in his voice was like a dam breaking inside me. To be heard, to be understood, to have my feelings affirmed by someone who saw me not as a doddering old fool but as his friend, it was more powerful than I could have imagined. "What do you want to do, Arthur?" he asked, his tone shifting from friend to lawyer. "Do you want to scare them? Cut them off? What's the end game here?" I took a deep breath. The plan, which had been a nebulous idea, began to solidify with his words. "I don't want to scare them, George. I want to liberate myself. I want to take back control of my life and my legacy. I want to make it clear that my worth is not tied to my wallet. And I want to do it in a way they will never, ever forget." I could almost hear him nodding on the other end of the line. "I see. This isn't about revenge. It's about reclamation." "Exactly," I said. "Eleanor and I worked hard for everything we have. We built it from nothing. It was supposed to be a foundation for our family's future, a source of security. But they see it as an entitlement. A prize to be claimed. I cannot let her memory be tarnished by their greed. So, we changed the terms," George said, his voice now brimming with professional energy. "We rewrite the ending. Your will, Arthur. Who is the executor? Who are the beneficiaries?" "Clara is the sole executor," I admitted, the words tasting like poison. "And she and Tom, or rather, their children, are the primary beneficiaries. The house, the portfolio, everything." George let out a low whistle. "They hold all the cards." "Not anymore," I said, a newfound strength in my voice. "I want to change it. All of it. I want to sell the house. I don't want to live in this mausoleum anymore. I want to liquidate the assets. And I want to give it away." There was another pause. "Give it away? To whom?" "I've been thinking about that," I said, pacing the study. My eyes landed on a photograph on the mantelpiece, Eleanor, beaming, cutting the ribbon at the opening of a new wing of the city's Youth Art Center, a project she had championed for years. "The Eleanor Penhaligon Arts Foundation," I said, the name coming to me in a flash of inspiration. "I want to create a charitable foundation in her name. To fund arts programs for underprivileged children. It's what she would have wanted. Her real legacy isn't this house, it's the joy and creativity she brought to the world. This would honor that." George was silent for a moment longer, and then he let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a laugh of mockery, but of pure, unadulterated admiration. "Arthur Penhaligon, you old fox. It's brilliant. It's clean. It's powerful. And it's completely unassailable. They won't be able to touch it." The energy crackling through the phone line was infectious. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. "Can it be done, George? Can it be done quickly?" "It can," he confirmed. "We'll need to move fast. I'll draw up the paperwork for a new will and irrevocable living trust first thing in the morning. We'll change the executor to a neutral third party, me, if you'll have me. We'll establish the foundation. We'll get a real estate agent on the house immediately. You, my friend, are about to become a very busy man." "Good," I said. "And George?" "There's one more thing, and name it. I want to tell them. Face to face. I want to see their faces when they realize what they've done." George considered this. "A confrontation. Risky. But effective. Where do you want to do it?" A slow, cold smile spread across my face. "Where else? La Belle Epoque." The conversation with George was the catalyst. It transformed my simmering resentment into a focused, actionable plan. The following day, I felt like a man reborn. The heavy cloak of melancholy that had been my constant companion for 3 years had been replaced by a suit of armor forged from purpose and resolve. George was true to his word. By 10 a.m., his assistant had emailed me a raft of documents. A new last will and testament, the paperwork to establish a living trust, and the initial charter for the Eleanor Penhaligon Arts Foundation. Sitting in Eleanor's study, a place that had once been a symbol of my grief, I read through every line of legal jargon. The room no longer felt like a tomb, but a command center. I wasn't just a grieving widower anymore, I was the chairman of my own life, about to call the most important meeting to order. My first call was to a highly recommended real estate agent George had suggested. A brisk, efficient woman named Sarah answered. I explained that I wanted to sell my large, 5-bedroom family home as quickly as possible. We're looking to downsize, I said, though we are slipping out unconsciously before I corrected myself. I'm looking to downsize. Something smaller, more modern. A condo downtown. Perhaps she was, of course, delighted. An appointment was made for her to come and assess the property the very next day. Hanging up the phone, I looked around at the house. The walls were filled with a lifetime of memories, but now I saw them differently. They were no longer anchors to the past, but assets to be liquidated for a better future. The weight of the place, its upkeep, its emptiness, suddenly felt immense. The thought of leaving it behind wasn't sad, it was liberating. My next task was the most difficult, but also the most necessary. I needed to set the stage for the final act. I needed to summon Clara and Tom. I picked up the phone to call my daughter, my heart a steady drum against my ribs. I had my script ready. She answered on the second ring, her voice cloyingly sweet. Dad! I was just about to call you. How are you feeling? I'm fine, Clara, I said, my tone neutral. How is Lily? Is her fever any better? There was a fractional hesitation. Oh. Yes, much better. It was just one of those 24-hour things, thank goodness. She's right as rain this morning, the lie was so effortless for her. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, but I pushed the feeling down. I had a role to play. That's wonderful news, I said. Listen, the reason I'm calling, something's come up. I've been doing some thinking about the future. About my estate. I let the word estate hang in the air between us, a baited hook. I could almost hear her ears perk up. This was the language she understood. Oh, she said, her voice now sharp with interest, the fake sympathy gone. Is everything all right, Dad? Your health? My health is fine. But one can't be too careful. I've been speaking with my lawyer, and I've made some decisions. I think it's important that we all sit down and discuss them. You, me, and Tom are, of course, Dad. Absolutely. Anything you need. When and where? The eagerness in her voice was sickening. They would drop everything for the chance to talk about their inheritance. I'd like to do it tomorrow evening, I said. I know it's short notice, not a problem at all. We'll make it work, she chirped. Where should we meet? We can come to the house. No, I said firmly. Not at the house. I've already made a reservation. For 7:30. At La Belle Epoque the silence on her end was deafening. I could picture her face, the confusion warring with her greed. She couldn't possibly object. She couldn't admit they had just been there. To do so would be to reveal her lie. It was the perfect trap. La Belle Epoque, she stammered finally. That's a lovely choice, Dad. I thought so, I said calmly. It's a place for special occasions. And this, I feel, is a very special occasion, right? She said, her voice a little strained. We'll be there. 7:30. Wonderful. I'll see you both then. I hung up the phone before she could ask any more questions. The checkmate was a thing of beauty. They had to come. Their greed wouldn't allow them to miss a meeting about my estate. And they had to walk back into that restaurant and pretend it was their first time there in ages. They would have to sit in that room of their crime and lie to my face. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity. I met with a financial advisor from George's firm. We began the process of restructuring my portfolio, shifting assets into the new trust. It was exhilarating. I was dismantling the gilded cage they had built around me, brick by brick. Late that afternoon, the phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered, and a small, sweet voice said, "Grandad." It was Lily. My heart ached. "Lilybug. How are you feeling, sweetheart?" I'm good, she said brightly. Mommy said I was sick, but I wasn't. I just had to stay with the babysitter. She said you couldn't come to the grown-up party because you were busy. The innocent words were like a dagger. They hadn't just lied to me, they had lied to her, too, making me the villain, the one who was too busy for his family. Well, I was busy, sweetheart, I said gently, my resolve hardening into diamond. I was making plans for a very important surprise. A surprise? For me? For a lot of people, I said, looking at the foundation charter on the desk. And yes, for you too. I love you very much, Lilybug. I love you too, Grandad. Bye. She hung up. That call was the final confirmation I needed. This wasn't just for me. It was for Lily. It was to ensure that she grew up with at least one person in her life who valued honesty and integrity above all else. It was to protect a small piece of her future from the grasping hands of her own parents. I was ready. The stage was set. The actors had their scripts. Tomorrow night, the curtain would rise on the final act. And I would be the one directing. The next evening, I dressed with the meticulous care of a general preparing for a decisive battle. I chose my best suit, a dark charcoal wool that Eleanor had always loved. I wore the gold watch she had given me for our 30th anniversary, its quiet, steady ticking a reassuring presence on my wrist. Looking at my reflection in the mirror, I saw not the tired, lonely man of a few days ago, but someone else. My eyes were clear, my jaw was set. There was a calmness in my expression that felt entirely new. I was not nervous. I was ready. George had called earlier in the day to confirm our strategy. He would meet me at the restaurant at 7:15, acting as my legal counsel and witness. His presence would lend an air of officialdom to the proceedings and prevent Clara and Tom from derailing the conversation with emotional outbursts. "Remember, Arthur," he had said, "you are in complete control. Let them talk. Let them dig their own graves. You just deliver the facts." Calmly and clearly I arrived at La Belle Epoque before anyone else. The hostess from the other night was there. She recognized me immediately, her eyes widening slightly with a mixture of curiosity and professional discretion. "Mr. Penhaligon. Good evening." "Welcome back." "Good evening," I said with a polite nod. "My friend, Mr. Albright, will be joining me shortly. We'll be meeting my daughter and her husband. A table for 4, please." "Of course, sir. The booth by the window is available, if you'd like." The cold smile touched my lips. "No. I think a table in the center of the room would be more appropriate this evening." I wanted them to feel exposed, with no corner to hide in. She led me to a prominent round table in the heart of the dining room. I sat down, my back to the entrance, and surveyed the scene. The restaurant was already filling up, the low hum of conversation and the clinking of cutlery creating a pleasant, civilized atmosphere. It was the perfect backdrop for the demolition I was about to perform. George arrived precisely at 7:15, looking dapper and formidable in a tailored suit. He shook my hand firmly. "Ready, old friend?" "More than ready," I said. We ordered a bottle of sparkling water and waited. They were late, of course. Punctuality was a courtesy they rarely extended to me. Finally, at nearly 7:45, I saw the hostess leading them towards our table. Clara was wearing a dress that was both expensive and too tight, a look of strained pleasantness plastered on her face. Tom followed behind her, his expression a mixture of feigned solemnity and barely concealed avarice. His eyes darted around the room, assessing the clientele, no doubt pleased to be back in such opulent surroundings. Their smiles froze when they saw George sitting with me. "Dad," Clara said, her voice tight with confusion. "Who is this?" "Clara, Tom, you remember my old friend, George Albright," I said smoothly. "George is my legal advisor. I thought it best he be present for our discussions." George stood and gave them a curt, professional nod, not offering a hand to shake. The gesture was not lost on them. They exchanged a quick, worried glance before sitting down. The air was thick with tension. So, Tom began, attempting a hearty, man-to-man tone that fell completely flat. An estate discussion? Sounds serious. Hope you're not planning on checking out on us anytime soon, Arthur, he chuckled, a horrible, grating sound. My health is excellent, Tom, thank you for your concern, I replied, my voice level. This isn't about my demise. It's about my life. A waiter appeared, and they eagerly ordered the most expensive wine on the menu, a knee-jerk reaction to a tense situation and an open tab. I let them. I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them complacent. For the next 10 minutes, I allowed them to control the conversation. They filled the silence with empty chatter about their work, about a holiday they were planning, about the rising cost of everything. It was a masterclass in self-absorption. All the while, I watched them, my gaze steady. I noted the way Clara couldn't quite meet my eye, the way Tom kept glancing at George as if trying to size him up. Finally, there was a lull in the conversation. This was my moment. It's a lovely restaurant, isn't it? I said casually, swirling the water in my glass. So full of memories. Clara seized on the safe topic. Oh, yes, Dad. A wonderful choice. It's been ages since we were here. The lie was so bold, so audacious, spoken in the very room where they had committed their deception just 48 hours earlier. I let her words hang in the air for a moment, savoring the dramatic irony. Has it? I asked softly. That's funny. Because I was under the impression you were here on Thursday night. The change in the atmosphere was instantaneous. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Clara's face went white. Tom, who had been lifting his wine glass to his lips, froze mid-sip, his eyes wide with panic. What are you talking about, Dad? Clara stammered, her voice a reedy whisper. We were at home. With Lily. She was sick, remember? I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone, but loud enough for them to hear every single word with perfect clarity. I remember you telling me she was sick, yes. Which is why I was so surprised when I came here anyway, just to have a quiet drink at the bar, and saw you. And Tom. And Mark. Sitting in that very booth right over there. I gestured with my head towards the empty window booth. You all looked like you were having a wonderful time. The champagne, the oysters. You looked so happy. So healthy. I must say, Clara, your recovery from being up all night with a sick child was nothing short of miraculous. The silence that followed was absolute. They stared at me, their faces a perfect diptych of horror and disbelief. The masks had not just slipped, I had ripped them off. There were no more lies to hide behind. There was only the ugly, naked truth, sitting at the table with us. They stopped talking. The color had drained from their faces, replaced by a ghastly, mottled pallor. Tom slowly lowered his wine glass back to the table, his hand trembling slightly. Clara's mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. She looked from me to George and back again, her eyes wide with a dawning, sickening realization. This wasn't just a social call. This was an ambush. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. It was broken only by the distant clatter of silverware and the murmur of other people's happy, oblivious conversations. For my daughter and her husband, our table had become a tiny, soundproof island of dread. Tom was the first to find his voice, though it was a mere shadow of its usual booming confidence. Arthur, there must be some misunderstanding, he stammered, avoiding my gaze and looking at the tablecloth as if it held the answers. You must have seen someone else. We were at home. I swear the desperation in his voice was pathetic. He was still trying to cling to the wreckage of their lie, even as the waves of truth were crashing over them. There is no misunderstanding, Tom, I said, my voice as cold and hard as polished granite. I saw you. I saw the bottle of Chateau Neuf du Pape you ordered. I saw the way you laughed when Clara showed you something on her phone. I saw Mark sulking when you told him to put his own phone away. I saw everything. I paused, letting the details sink in, each one a nail in the coffin of their deceit. In fact, I even took care of your bill. A little surprise. I hope you enjoyed the meal. It was, after all, on me. As usual, Clara flinched as if I had struck her. The mention of the bill, the confirmation that I had been there, watching, had stripped away the last of her defenses. A flush of shame, dark and ugly, crept up her neck. Dad! She began, her voice cracking. We can explain, can you? I asked, raising a skeptical eyebrow. Can you explain why you lied to me? Can you explain why you felt it was acceptable to exclude me from a family dinner that I was paying for, using the flimsy excuse of a sick child who, by her own account, was perfectly fine? Can you explain the sheer, breathtaking disrespect of it all? George sat silently beside me, a formidable, immovable object. His presence alone was an indictment. He didn't need to say a word. He was the embodiment of consequence. Tom, seeing that denial was futile, shifted tactics to blustering indignation. Now, hold on a minute, Arthur. It wasn't like that. We needed a night to ourselves. Just the three of us. It's been stressful lately. We didn't want to bother you with it, bother me. I repeated the words, letting the absurdity of them resonate in the space between us. You think my presence is a bother? But my money isn't. My generosity isn't. You are perfectly happy to be bothered by my bank account, just not by me. Is that the explanation you were going for? Because it's not a very good one. Clara finally looked at me, her eyes swimming with tears. They were not tears of remorse, I knew. They were tears of self-pity. Tears of being caught. Dad, please, she whispered. Don't do this. I'm not the one doing anything, Clara, I said, my voice softening slightly, but not with pity. It was the calm voice of a surgeon before a necessary amputation. You did this. You and Tom. You have spent years treating me as an inconvenience, a relic from a bygone era whose only remaining function is to fund your lifestyle. This dinner was not an isolated incident. It was merely the final, clarifying straw. It made me realize that I have been enabling you. And that ends. Tonight this was it. The moment George and I had rehearsed. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a slim leather folio. I placed it on the table with a soft, definitive thud. As I mentioned, I have been speaking with my lawyer. And I have made some decisions about my estate. Their eyes, which had been darting around in panic, now locked onto the folio with a desperate, laser-like focus. Greed, it seemed, was a more powerful instinct than shame. What is that? Tom asked, his voice raspy. This, I said, tapping the folio with my finger, is my new life. And your new reality. I opened the folio and slid 2 documents across the table towards them. The first document is a signed and notarized copy of my new last will and testament. As you can see, I have removed Clara as the executor. That role will now be filled by Mr. Albright's firm. I find their judgment to be significantly more reliable. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tom snatched the papers, his eye scanning the page with frantic speed. The second document, I continued, my voice unwavering, is the charter for a newly established charitable organization, the Eleanor Penhaligon Arts Foundation. I slid another paper towards them, this one bearing a handsome new letterhead. My entire portfolio of stocks, bonds, and liquid assets, upon my death, will be transferred into an endowment for this foundation. It will provide funding for arts education for underprivileged children across the state. It's a fitting legacy for your mother, I think. She loved children, and she believed in the power of creativity. Far more than she believed in the power of new hot tubs. The barb hit its mark. Tom paled, remembering the lie about the roof. His eyes were wide with horror as he did the frantic mental arithmetic, watching his inheritance, their future, evaporate before his very eyes. You can't, he whispered, his voice shaking with rage and disbelief. That's our money. That's our children's future. It has never been your money, Tom, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. It is my money. And it was my and Eleanor's money. We built it. You have done nothing but try to spend it. And as for your children's future, perhaps this will teach them a valuable lesson. One you clearly failed to learn. The lesson of self-sufficiency. Of integrity. I let that sink in before delivering the final blow. Oh, and there's one more thing. The house. Clara looked up, a sliver of desperate hope in her eyes. The house was their crown jewel, the multi-million-dollar property they had been mentally redecorating for years. The house is being put on the market tomorrow morning, I said with a serene smile. I decided I no longer require such a large space. I'm moving downtown. The proceeds from the sale, which I'm told will be substantial, will provide the seed capital for the foundation. I'll be making the first donation myself. The hope in Clara's eyes died, replaced by a look of utter devastation. It was the look of someone who had just watched their entire world burn to the ground. She stared at me, speechless, her face a mask of tragedy. The silence returned, absolute and final. They had nothing left to say. There were no more lies, no more excuses, no more manipulations. There was only the stark, unchangeable truth of the document sitting on the table between us. I had taken their future, the one they had counted on, the one they had been willing to lie and cheat and humiliate me for, and I had given it away. Not out of spite, but out of love for my late wife, and out of a newfound respect for myself. I had given them a surprise they would never forget. And in doing so, I had finally, truly, set myself free. I looked at their faces, two portraits of silent devastation illuminated by the soft candlelight of the restaurant. Tom's face was puce, a vein throbbing in his temple. He looked like a man who was simultaneously choking and about to explode. Clara simply looked broken. Her tears had dried, leaving her eyes vacant and hollow. The vibrant, calculating woman from 48 hours ago was gone, replaced by this shell. I felt a pang, not of pity, but of a deep, sorrowful ache for the daughter I once had, the little girl who used to hold my hand and believe I was the strongest man in the world. Where had she gone? When had she been replaced by this stranger, this woman whose values were so alien to me? There is, however, a small provision for you, I said, my voice pulling them back from their private hells. They both looked up, a flicker of something, not hope, but a desperate, grasping curiosity in their eyes. I slid one final sheet of paper from the folio. I have instructed my lawyer to set up a small trust. It will pay out to you the exact sum of £5,000. It was the same amount they had lied about for the hot tub. The significance was not lost on them. Tom's face contorted in a sneer of contempt. 5,000? That's an insult. No, Tom, I said, my voice calm and even. An insult is what you did to me. This is an accounting. It is a final settlement for all the years of emotional withdrawals you have made. Consider it severance pay. It is the last penny you will ever receive from me. I folded the paper and placed it back in the folio. George, who had been a silent and powerful witness throughout, cleared his throat. The documents are, of course, ironclad, he said, his voice a deep baritone that commanded attention. Arthur's mental state is, as you can see, perfectly sound. Any attempt to contest the will or the trust will be met with a vigorous and, I assure you, extremely costly legal defense, which will be paid for by the Foundation's assets. You would, in effect, be suing a children's charity. He let that statement hang in the air, a final, brutal checkmate. The fight visibly drained out of Tom. He slumped in his chair, defeated. The prospect of not only losing the inheritance but also having to pay legal fees to fight for it was a bridge too far for his avaricious soul. I stood up, my movements feeling light and unburdened. Well, I said, placing my napkin on the table. I think our business here is concluded. George, shall we? George rose with me. We stood there for a moment, looking down at the wreckage. Clara wouldn't look at me. She just stared at the table, at the documents that represented the demolition of her life's expectations. I had one last thing to say. One final thought to leave them with. You know, the saddest part of all of this, Clara, I said, my voice softer now, tinged with a genuine melancholy. Is that all I ever really wanted was your time? Your respect? Your company? If you had just given me that, freely and honestly, you would have eventually received everything else. All of it. But you couldn't. You were so focused on the prize at the end of the race that you didn't realize the race itself was the prize. You traded your father's love for a single, secret dinner. I hope it was worth it. With that, I turned my back on them. I walked away, George by my side. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel their silence, a palpable void in the bustling restaurant. We walked out into the cool night air, and for the first time in 3 years, I took a breath that felt truly deep and cleansing. The weight I had been carrying for so long, the weight of their expectations, their neglect, their endless disappointments, it was gone. I had not destroyed them. They had destroyed themselves with their own greed. I had simply held up a mirror. In the car on the way home, George was quiet for a long time. Finally, he turned to me. "Are you all right, Arthur?" he asked, his voice gentle. "I am more than all right, George," I said, looking out at the city lights flashing by. "I feel free. I feel like I've finally honored Eleanor. And myself." He smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "She would be incredibly proud of you, my friend." Incredibly proud. When I got back to the house, it felt different yet again. It was no longer a tomb or a war room. It was just a house. A collection of bricks and mortar filled with things. Things that no longer owned me. For the first time, the idea of leaving it didn't feel like a betrayal of Eleanor's memory. It felt like the next logical step. Our life was not contained in these walls. It was in my heart. And my heart was finally ready to move on. I slept that night more deeply than I had in years. There were no ghosts, no regrets. Just a profound sense of peace. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birdsong, not the oppressive silence I was used to. The world felt new, full of possibility. The real estate agent, Sarah, arrived promptly at 10. She was professional and efficient, but as she walked through the silent, stately rooms, I saw a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "It's a beautiful home," she said softly. "So many memories here, I imagine." "Yes," I replied, looking at a faded pencil mark on a doorframe where we had measured Clara's height as a child. "But memories are portable. You can take them with you." I had taken the first and most important step in reclaiming my life. The confrontation was over. The ties of financial and emotional manipulation were severed. Now, the rest of my life could begin. It was a blank page, and for the first time in a very long time, I was the one holding the pen. The days that followed were a whirlwind of liberating activity. Selling a house, I discovered, is a process of systematic detachment. It forces you to confront every object, every piece of furniture, and ask a simple question: is this part of my past, or part of my future? With Sarah's expert guidance, we prepared the house for sale. Packers and movers, people I hired to help with the physical burden, moved through the rooms like archaeologists, carefully boxing up a lifetime. I was ruthless in my decisions. The grand dining table where we'd hosted countless family holidays? It belonged to the house, not to me. It would be sold with the property. The heavy, ornate furniture in the living room? Donate it. The endless collection of knickknacks and dust collectors? Let them go. I kept only the things that truly mattered: my photographs of Eleanor, her favorite books, the small, chipped teacup she drank from every morning, my father's old watch, and a box of Lily's crayon drawings. Everything else was just stuff, anchors to a life I was no longer living. I found that the more I gave away, the lighter I felt. Each box that left the house was another weight off my shoulders. I was not erasing my past with Eleanor, I was distilling it down to its purest essence. Clara and Tom remained silent. I received no angry phone calls, no tearful recriminations, no desperate appeals. It was a silence born not of acceptance, but of impotence. They knew they had no move left to make. They had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered that silence was their only remaining option. I knew their anger and resentment would be festering, poisoning their own lives from the inside out. That was their burden to carry now, not mine. the house sold astonishingly quickly. A young family, a doctor and a lawyer with 2 small children, fell in love with it. They saw it not as a stately, silent museum, but as a place to be filled with noise and laughter and life. Seeing their excitement as they walked through the rooms during the final inspection, I felt a sense of rightness about it all. The house deserved to be happy again. While the sale was being finalized, George and I worked on finding my new home. I knew exactly what I wanted. The opposite of what I had. I wanted small, bright, and modern. I wanted to be downtown, in the heart of the city, where I could walk to cafes, museums, and theaters. Where the sound of life was a constant hum outside my window. We found the perfect place, a 2-bedroom corner apartment on the 15th floor of a new building. It had floor-to-ceiling windows with a panoramic view of the city skyline and the park below. The second bedroom would be my study, but also a guest room for when Lily came to visit. It was clean, bright, and utterly devoid of ghosts. It was a blank canvas. The closing on the old house and the purchase of the new apartment were scheduled for the same day. George handled everything with his signature efficiency. I signed the papers, transferring the vast sum from the house sale directly into the foundation's new bank account. Holding the pen, I felt the monumental significance of the act. I was signing away a fortune, a legacy of material wealth. But in its place, I was creating a legacy of opportunity and kindness. It was the best deal I had ever made. A few days before the move, I sat on a packing box in the empty living room and made a call. I had created a separate educational trust for Lily, completely firewalled from her parents. It was modest but substantial enough to ensure she could go to any university she chose, to travel, to pursue her dreams without financial worry. I had arranged for the trust to be managed by George's firm, with payments made directly to the institutions, ensuring Clara and Tom could never get their hands on it. I had decided not to tell them about it. It was a private gift between a grandfather and his granddaughter, a secret bond of love that they couldn't tarnish. My call was to the executive director of the City Youth Arts Center, the place Eleanor had poured so much of her heart into. I introduced myself and explained that I was the representative of a new philanthropic entity, the Eleanor Penhaligon Arts Foundation. "I'm calling to inform you," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "that the foundation would like to make its inaugural donation to your center." A gift of £1 million. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a choked, disbelieving gasp. £1 million? Mr. Penhaligon, are you serious?" "I am very serious," I said, a wide smile spreading across my face. "My late wife believed deeply in your mission. The funds are unrestricted. Use them to create, to inspire, to give children the gift of art. That's all we ask." The director began to weep, tears of pure, unadulterated joy and gratitude. We spoke for half an hour about the programs they could now create, the children they could reach. It was the most satisfying conversation I had had in years. This was real. This was a legacy. Not a number in a bank account, but a tangible impact on the world, all in Eleanor's name. My revenge on Clara and Tom was not the confrontation in the restaurant. It was this. It was taking the money they coveted and transforming it into something beautiful, something they could never comprehend or appreciate. The ultimate surprise was not that they lost the money, but that it was being used to create joy. And that, I knew, would be the bitterest pill for them to swallow. Moving day arrived, a crisp, clear morning that felt like the first day of a new season. The movers were efficient, and by noon, the last of my distilled life, a few dozen boxes containing photographs, books, and memories, was loaded onto the truck. I took one last walk through the empty house. The rooms echoed with my footsteps. Sunlight streamed through the bare windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It wasn't sad. It felt peaceful, like the end of a long and important chapter. I locked the front door for the final time and dropped the keys into a pre-addressed envelope for the new owners. I didn't look back as I drove away. My new apartment was a world away from the old house. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I had made the right decision. The view was breathtaking. The entire city was spread out before me like a map of possibilities. The space was bright, airy, and filled with the promise of a new beginning. I spent the afternoon unpacking my books and placing my photographs of Eleanor on the shelves. Here, surrounded by light and the vibrant energy of the city, her smile in the pictures seemed brighter, happier. She wasn't a ghost in a lonely house anymore, she was a joyful presence in my new life. George came by that evening with a bottle of champagne to celebrate. We stood by the massive window, looking out at the glittering city lights. "To new beginnings, Arthur," he said, raising his glass. "And to a legacy well built to Eleanor," I replied, clinking my glass against his. "And to friends who show up when you need them most." We talked for hours, not about the past, but about the future. I told him about my plans to volunteer at the art center, to travel, to take a cooking class, all the things I had put off for years. I felt a surge of excitement, an enthusiasm for life that I thought had been extinguished forever. The loneliness that had been my shadow for so long had dissipated. I was still alone, but I was no longer lonely. There was a profound difference. Loneliness was an absence, a void. Aloneness was a choice, a state of peaceful self-possession. The next morning, I was sitting in my new, comfortable armchair, reading the paper and sipping my coffee, when my phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. I peered at the screen. It was from Clara. My heart gave a slight jolt, but it was one of curiosity, not dread. The message was short, just a link to a news article from the city's main paper. I hesitated for a moment, then tapped the link. The headline jumped out at me: "Local Art Center receives landmark 7-figure donation from newly formed Eleanor Penhaligon Arts Foundation." The article was glowing. It praised the incredible, transformative generosity of the anonymous donor's family. It featured an interview with the tearfully grateful director, who spoke of the hundreds of children whose lives would be changed. There was a large, beautiful photo of Eleanor from the center's archives, smiling radiantly. My daughter had sent me the article without comment. I knew what it was. It was her final, silent communication. It was a white flag. It was an admission of defeat. It was, perhaps, the tiniest, most microscopic flicker of understanding. She was showing me that she had seen what I had done, what I had created from the ashes of our broken relationship. She would never admit it, but in sending that link, she was acknowledging the magnitude of my act. It was bigger than her greed. It was a legacy. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. I closed the article and went back to my coffee, a quiet, peaceful smile on my face. The last piece had just clicked into place. My new life had truly begun. The chains of the past were well and truly broken. I was free. The final act of my transformation was subtle, an internal shift that radiated outward. In the weeks that followed, I built a new routine, one based not on obligation or the lonely maintenance of the past, but on genuine interest and quiet joy. I started my days by walking in the park below my building, a coffee in hand, watching the city wake up. I joined the local library and rediscovered my love for history. I found a small, family-run Italian restaurant where the owner greeted me by name and always saved me a quiet table by the window. I began volunteering at the Eleanor Penhaligon Art Center. I didn't announce who I was, I just signed up as Arthur, a retired gentleman with some time on his hands. My job was simple: I helped set up paints, clean brushes, and sharpen pencils. The children, a whirlwind of chaotic, creative energy, paid me little mind, and that was perfect. I was simply part of the background, a quiet enabler of their joy. To see their faces light up as they smeared bright colors onto paper, to hear their uninhibited laughter echoing through the halls, that was my reward. This was what the money was for. This was Eleanor's true inheritance. One afternoon, a little girl with pigtails and a paint-smudged nose tugged on my sleeve. "Mister, can you help me make purple?" she asked. I smiled and showed her how to mix the red and blue, watching her eyes widen in wonder as the new color emerged. In that small, simple moment, I felt a connection more real and profound than any I had shared with Clara and Tom in a decade. A few months into my new life, I received a letter. It was handwritten, on crisp, formal stationery. It was from Clara. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. It was not the angry, vitriolic screed I might have once expected. It was short, just a few paragraphs. She wrote that she was sorry. She didn't make excuses or try to justify her actions. She simply said that she had been living in a fog of entitlement and fear, and that my actions, as shocking and painful as they were, had been a wake-up call. She wrote that Tom had been forced to take a second job, that they had sold their oversized house and moved into a smaller, more modest one. She wrote that for the first time in their lives, they were having to live within their means, and that it was terrifying, but also, in a strange way, clarifying. The letter did not ask for forgiveness. It did not ask for money. It simply stated the facts. It was an acknowledgement, a final report from the life I had left behind. I read it several times, then folded it and put it away. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I felt a quiet, detached sadness for the lessons they had to learn so late in life. I hoped, for their sakes, and for Lily's, that the lessons would stick. My only remaining connection to that world was Lily. I saw her every other weekend. I would pick her up and we would have our own adventures. We went to museums, to the zoo, to puppet shows. I never spoke a word about her parents, and she, with the innate wisdom of a child, never asked. Our time together was a protected space, a bubble of pure, uncomplicated love. One sunny Saturday, we were having ice cream in the park. She was chattering away about a new friend at school when she suddenly grew quiet. "Grandad," she said, looking at me with her serious, dark eyes. "Are you happy?" The question was so direct, so pure, it took my breath away. I looked at the city skyline behind her, at the children playing on the grass, at the bright blue sky above. I thought of my quiet apartment, my books, the smell of paint at the art center. I thought of the peace in my heart. "Yes, my Lilybug," I said, my voice thick with an emotion that surprised me. "I am very, very happy," she beamed, a brilliant, sunshine smile. "Good," she said, as if that was all that mattered in the world. And in that moment, it was. My life was not what I had planned. It was not the gentle, shared retirement with Eleanor, surrounded by a loving and grateful family. It was something else entirely. It was a life forged in disappointment and grief, but reforged in resilience and self-respect. It was a life of quiet purpose, of gentle joys, of a legacy not of wealth, but of kindness. I had been underestimated, cast aside, and left in the silence. But in that silence, I had found my own voice. And I had used it to write a new, and much better, story. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, I took my granddaughter's small hand in mine, and we walked towards home. My home. And for the first time in a very long time, I was truly looking forward to tomorrow.